So with file uploads is kind of something that we can't do a lot about with WAF as well. This isn't tampering with a web application usually in the sense of what you need to protect with a file upload. But to the tampering aspect for a file upload, yes, the WAF can protect you from that. Just the contents of the file, not so much. But still, to some extent, actually the WAF can protect you from some of the contents too. Just kind of depends on how the file transfer is done. And that's certainly per web app and how it's all built out. But in this case, it's more of a form based. So we'll go ahead and check this one out here. Create a URL. Look at that. We're building quite the policy structure now. And I screwed that. And there you go. That's what happens when you make a typo. Could have not noticed that and ran with it. So try that again. Wildcard. Uncheck, uncheck, and create. Now, this is one reason why it is beneficial to create the URL structure, at least kind of to begin with in some cases, just to help you visually see how the site is built and how it all kind of works. So kind of like this, we can see vulnerabilities, everything really is under this path. So it is very potential that we could add a wildcard for vulnerabilities or even remove the slash matching aspect where we could match multiple slashes with the wildcard and kind of cover this and shorten it. But this is something that we didn't necessarily know right off the cuff. As we develop our web app WAF policy, we've certainly become enlightened to this aspect. Now, the reason why this is a good point is because in the WAF space, we don't necessarily need any direct access or contact with app dev to manage a WAF and protect their web apps. So in this case, this is why we get away with a lot of assumptions based upon analytics and what we see over time, and we adjust as needed. Now, is there absolutely a need to have that communication? Yeah, of course. I mean, it really should be established. There should be some kind of back and forth, but for the most part, everybody should operate pretty independently, where WAF team essentially does their own thing and the app dev folks do their own thing, and we kind of figure each other out on our own because we're good at our jobs. And also we follow SDLC. So all these problems that could ever arise would be discovered in a lower environment versus production directly. So moving on back to the main points here, let's go ahead and see what we can protect. So we have our browse, and that's just going to pull up all your local file contents. And I have a PHP upload.php file. I wonder, can we upload this? Because take note, it says choose an image. And is it going to enforce it? Or is that just up to me to decide to pick and choose an image and not accidentally upload a virus? I don't know. Let's find out. Successful upload. Okay. Well, clearly it allows that. That dot dot slash is pretty terrifying. It's another conversation. But all right, so we come over here and we take a look at our request. Now we see the request payload, and for that note, post. And looking down here, and it's not kind of like the same form that we saw earlier, where it was parameter equals value, ampersand, parameter equals value, so forth and so on. Now, another special thing that we can see here that is very awesome, max file limit. So this web app actually does have a defined file size limit. What can we do with that? Enforce it. So we'll take that into consideration, 100,000. And then down here, this gets a little more complicated to kind of explain, but a couple of the parameters that this thing is going to see for the form data aspect is going to be name and file name. So we already covered name earlier, and by the way, there's our contents of the file. So you can actually see it pretty raw, and even calls out the content type in transit. That's not something we necessarily want to be uploading, but can we mitigate that with the WAF? To some extent, yes. We'll cover that here in a second, though. So for file name, we definitely want to put some controls around the file name, make it file name-esque. And then for the name, that implies the actual function of what's being done. In this case, it's actually referencing what the parameter is for the upload portion of this entire content for the form payload. So moving on, we've got a name and we've got the file name for the parameters that we need to protect. Come over here and we'll go down to our parameters. And for that record, we have name already. So we'll go ahead and do uploaded. Keep in mind, we had a max file size of 100,000, and that directly equates to this one. So 1, 2, 3, and there we go. Now, empty value, if you just click the upload button without actually uploading a file, should invoke something on the page. So we'll go and allow the ability to have an empty value, but not in the sense of repeat occurrence, because this is a single file upload page, just like we explained earlier. So won't rinse and repeat that one. Value meta characters. This one gets sketchy. Just kind of depends on the type of file that you're uploading, and what you're going to allow. So sometimes you can allow this, sometimes you can't. Just kind of depends. In our case, we'll go and turn it on, and we'll run with defaults and essentially see what happens. So attack signatures. This is something that will definitely come into handy. So had we had attack signatures turned on for this case, that PHP info and system function calls, those actually will get flagged by the WAF. So that's one way the WAF would actually be able to protect you from certain kind of malicious file uploads in the sense of content. But the more encoded the file is, kind of like a PDF, zip file, etc., you can't inspect those with the WAF. Unless, of course, you have a virus service and totally separate advanced feature. So we're not covering that. Probably never will, because it's a WAF. You should ideally have some sort of antivirus and file scanning system in the back end handling all that for you as is. That's not the WAF's job to inspect that type of content at that depth. That's something that you can do kind of a little more efficient once a file is already transferred to begin with, given the fact we had it set within the limitation. So we're not going to allow a 10 gig file upload in this case because the web app does not allow a 10 gig file. It only allows, 100,000 bytes. So nonetheless, that's the limit that we'll have. So we'll kind of carry on here. We'll go ahead and create this one. Now for the file name, 256 is kind of a normal file length limitation, but I've never really seen 256. And I've seen plenty of situations where 128 is kind of like a cap limit that's set. So we're just going to roll with that. And again, 256 is quite long. So we want some kind of limitation here. So we'll just roll with 128. And if we so discover that this doesn't work out in our favor, we could change it. Ideally, would I prefer more like 32 or 64? But I've had plenty of situations with federal document kind of cases where they tend to be a lot more longer file names, like dates, customer name, location, a whole bunch of detail all within the file name. So we'll kind of roll with 128 just to kind of set that middle line, a happy medium. For the character names, we can still force this one because file names do have certain limitations on what can be used. Now, different operating systems during different maturities, life cycles have changed what can and cannot work, but we'll kind of take a more basic approach. So we're not going to be as friendly as most as some file systems have become. Like your what copy of? No, that's a path. So we'll go ahead and allow that because it might be needed. And then these ones, no, no, and no. And just for the heck of it, we'll go ahead and pull over the comma, and we'll go ahead and set you to disallow. Now, we could allow the parentheses just because back to the copy of example or like new folder one, new folder two, but it's just like really poor file management that's being uploaded and usually implies just something stupid. I'm just gonna call it what it is. So ideally, I don't like to allow that and call it out if it ever does come up. Potentially provide the argument of like, well, that's just kind of dumb, but it's not a hill you'd want to die on. So it's like, we shouldn't allow this, but if it comes up and like, hey, you blocked this, and like, well, that was kind of dumb. And like, all right, well, it's kind of dumb that you're blocking it. All right, fine, I'll go ahead and allow it. So we'll start out this way, and this again is something you'd figure out through the SDLC lifecycle. So off the cuff, you can start out this way, lock it down pretty hard, and then you figure out what you need to allow. But then how much management overhead could you require down the road? You gotta kind of pick and choose your battles, and I have pretty good ideas what I can get away with and what I can manage. So we'll roll with this. Now, staging, nope. Empty value, totally possible. And repeat occurrence, single file upload. So we're only gonna allow one instance. And yeah, we'll go ahead and create that. And ultimately, that's about as good as it can get from the WAF perspective for the file upload controls. But at the very least, we can provide something to some degree. So if you're ever asked a question, is there something you can do? Like, well, not much. But at the very least, the answer is not no. It's like, well, sure, but not the greatest controls, but at least it's something. Do you have a good AV in the back end? All right. So moving on to the next one,